we just can't believe we get to do this. It is so special to see how every human is a beautiful soul, just a glorious, incredible soul. And we get to experience that. We don't even like getting to kind of meet you and talk to you is special because most clients, we just communicate over email. We don't ever actually meet the human. So we only experience them as a soul. And so
Yeah.
we're just like, wow, every client we have is incredible.
So, Donna, Diana, thank you so much. It's so good to have you both here with me today. And before we sort of dive into our conversation, I want to just very briefly offer an introduction to people who don't know you. So, first of all, you are both sisters. I think that's um, that's something that I found so striking and beautiful. And the fact that you've worked together with quantum healing for over 10 years now. And that was my kind of introduction to you, and we can talk about that a bit later. But also, you are co authors of 5 books, is that right? Three of which are a
Yes.
series of the golden age of the Atlantis, which again, is such a fascinating area, and I don't know enough about it, so I'm looking forward to finding out more about that. And then your other 2 books are nonfiction, the latest of which is Doorways of Death, which I'm reading, and I thought I would have finished by now, but I don't want to rush it. I'm sort of savoring it, and it's an amazing read. And again, we might talk a little bit about that too. So I know that Donna, you and Diana, you've come to this healing, chapter in your life through slightly different routes. So I think that's something I would love to talk more about. You, Donna, you were in the law enforcement and corporate tax, a whole different world to healing. So I'm fascinated by how you came to be doing this. And Diana, I think you were much more involved in healing and energy healing and all that from 2005. So maybe not such a big diversion for you, but anyway. So with that brief introduction, I would like to ask you, maybe Donna, you go first. What led you to come into this slightly different world from what you were doing before?
Yeah, well, in a nutshell, panic attacks and being unable to do what I was no longer meant to do.
Yeah.
It was very much a soul path diversion and all the tactics that our beautiful souls, our beautiful spirits, and our spirit guides use to help us to nudge us along to get on the path that we wanted to be on for this point in time in our incarnation. So that's the big picture. The smaller picture is I had managed corporate tax offices for 13 years, and then I went into law enforcement for a shorter amount of time. But as interesting as it was, my heart just couldn't take it anymore. I was getting a lot more sensitive and, waking up to energy and all the soul and spirit world. And law enforcement's a really hard place to be when you are very intuitive and very sensitive to all the energies, with all the peoples and all of that kind of stuff. Um, how that manifested was, my body started breaking down. I started to have a lot of mental fog and panic attacks, and it just got more and more serious until finally it was it was like, okay, I have to follow what my biggest interest and passion is right now, which was the Dolores Cannon work with QHHT, getting into the quantum healing world and really following where my senses were leading me as I was becoming more sensitive. Obviously our gifts and abilities are here for a reason. And so, yeah.
So what made you go into corporate tax and law enforcement? Because they don't seem like natural areas for someone who's very sensitive.
Well, I'm also very left brain, very logical, analytical. And what made me do that is my 2 sons. I had young boys and wanted to go back to work, but I didn't want to work really full time. So tax season, for here in the US, January through April, it's a lot of work. I was working 7 days a week sometimes, but then I'd have summers completely off. And then in the fall, it was very part time where I would be able to teach. So it really fit being a mother. and raising my sons. Mhm.
Thank you. Diana, what about you? Tell us how your path led you to what you do now.
Yeah, well, I started in the therapeutic world, like you said, in 2005 by going to massage school.
Mm,
And that was something I had always been. I'm the other side of the yin and yang here, very right brain, and have always been all feeling and touch and everything. So it was a really natural thing for me to go into. I had started in um, regular university in psychology as a degree, a major, and the further I got through that, the more it just wasn't quite the right fit for me. And
mm,
so I had a friend that was going through massage school, and as she talked about it, it was like, oh my gosh, that's what I want to do. So I switched over to that right before graduating with my degree in psychology. And it was, I mean, it was night and day. It was definitely where I was meant to be. And so from the get go, I was very interested in learning more about energy and about all the different systems of the body. So each one just took me deeper, started with the tissue and the muscles and the bones, and then it was the nerves, and then it was the fluids, and then it was the force moving through them. And so each thing just took me to the deeper thing. And it was actually through researching for our Atlantis books. We both were very interested in Atlantis, which was also deeply connected with energy and
mm,
consciousness and all of that. And that's how we found Dolores Cannon and then QHHT, the whole quantum healing world. So, and when I found that, it was like, oh, get to the root of things. That's what I want to do because that's what I had been seeking the whole time in my
yes.
own personal journey was getting to the root of these things, because of our childhood and just all the challenging experiences of our lives, my life. Yeah, so that's in a nutshell how I got to where I am today.
And I want to come back to the Atlantis books and what was the reason you got so curious and you spent 10 years researching it. And for people who don't know what Atlantis is, can you briefly describe because it's historical fiction, but it's not history as we know it, right? So can either of you maybe give us a little bit of a for someone who's never heard of Atlantis or no idea what that's about, can you tell us?
Atlantis is an ancient advanced civilization, of which there were many. We've come to understand through all the research that we've done that there were many ancient advanced civilizations that we don't have names or concepts for, but Atlantis lives in our psyche and I think in our bones and in our blood and in our genetics so strongly because I think it is the most recent one
Yeah.
that has come down to us, and I think that's why so many of us at a subconscious level remember Atlantis
Mm.
and our bodies remember Atlantis. So, an ancient advanced civilization that was worldwide. It was in many places over a long period of time, many thousands of years, in different iterations, of course. I think that's also why it lives in our memories, is
Mhm.
because it lasted so long. And I think many, many people incarnated on Earth now were part of Atlantis. I think
Mm.
a large majority of us were part of Atlantis because I think this is the reflection in the spirals or the cycles of time. I think today is a reflection of Atlantis, where we are meeting some of the same choice points, having some of the same soul lessons come up for us where we can maybe choose differently this time or try different things this time.
Yeah.
So,
And when you say that we all kind of remember being there, what do you mean by that?
I think it's more of that, when you're super drawn to go visit a place and you're like more drawn to go to Scotland than you are to Africa or vice versa. And so
Mm.
there's like a cellular memory that I think draws us to these places. And so people that don't know anything about Atlantis will still be like, yeah, Atlantis. And it's almost like a body remembrance, like Donna said, more than a mind of a familiarity, which is unexplainable in a way. And that's what started us down that path was this, we didn't know anything about it, but just the word Atlantis was like, there's like a pull. Yeah.
we were both inexplicably sort of very, very interested and almost obsessed with it. Like, what is this?
Mm-hmm.
We need to know more about this.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, very interested in what are many Atlantean things like crystals and rocks and energy and all other kinds of alternative healing and
Mm-hmm.
ancient knowledge and knowledge from the stars and the star people, all these things that were part of Atlantis, we were also interested in.
And no background to it. We were raised very, very fundamental Christian. So even the word energy was a bad word, like that's the dangerous side. You don't go there. So we had no reference points for these. And in 2007, I was already in the bodywork world. Donna was not at all and was still more steeped in the religion at that point, but starting to get out of it. So all this curiosity came in and it was like, we didn't even know what chakras were. So it was like, chakras, what are those? Energy, what is that? Meditation. So all of that was connected and part of it. And the more we researched it, the more we found out why.
I vividly remember the moment. You do too. There's this hot springs. We both love hot springs so much, and there's a lot out here in Colorado. So at the end of every tax season, the two of us would go to this hot springs, our favorite one. It's called Valley View Hot Springs here in Colorado. And it was kind of my R&R. It was a way for me to transition from the super busy corporate world back to home life and, just restore myself. So we were at this hot springs, and the whole time we were there, which was probably 4 or 5 days, we were talking about all of these interests, studying numerology and colors and all these energetic and spiritual things that we were each individually getting more and more into. So we talked about all these things, you know, the whole time we were at the hot springs. And then we were driving away, and one of us or both of us, suddenly said, Atlantis. What if we wrote, because we didn't really believe Atlantis was real at that time, but we kind of had heard of Atlantis, we'd heard the concept. So we said, what if we wrote a fiction story set in Atlantis and pulled all of these pathways of interest that we're exploring right now into that story and put it all together, not knowing that we would come to believe, or see that Atlantis was indeed very, very real.
Well, and we were both writers, so that was another huge interest, and I did all these creative writing classes, and we had both always written, and so that was part of it too. Was like we should write a story together. So it was just combining all of that, and really got us both committed to our writing process and developing that. And so it was really interesting how all these different interests of both of us came together in this, intention to write together.
And that was what, about a year or less before we discovered then Dolores Cannon. It was probably less than a year, because then that researching Atlantis and all these energetic and spiritual pathways led us to Dolores Cannon with QHHT. And then we started also using as research a lot of the people's past life regressions to Atlantis. So not only
a few years later.
Was it
2013, I think.
So the one flowed into the other in terms of,
yeah, it did.
Let's start writing about Atlantis. Oh, quantum healing. Oh, that's a fun way to research and build a world as well, is from people's actual past life memories. So
yes, and that's a beautiful segue into what quantum healing is. Now, I would say to you, I had never heard of it until I stumbled upon Dolores Cannon. Probably it feels like I've known her all of my life, because there's so much of her on YouTube that I just went through this phase that she became this, like, almost this grandmotherly figure whose voice just, helped me feel calmer. And, it was just beautiful. But it was probably only a year ago, or maybe even less. And so I never heard of it. And of course, when I actually listened to her, it all made so much sense. So for the people who are listening who have even less idea about what it's all about, can you explain what quantum healing is and why you were so drawn to it?
sure.
So quantum hypnosis healing therapy, or technique, QHHT, developed by Dolores Cannon over a series of a couple decades. She started doing hypnosis with her husband in the 60s. and they were doing the traditional long, laborious inductions to drop people into their subconscious mind. And what they were finding is they were regressing not only to childhood, but they would become other people.
Mm.
And so at that time, it was very, very new, this whole idea of other lives. Um, at least in their circles, she was Southern Baptist, and the whole Christian faith doesn't believe in reincarnation and all these other things. And so she was challenged personally herself in huge ways by what they were finding in sessions with people. And what they were doing is going back to the root of these challenges that they had, whether it was migraines or being blind or a disability of some sort. And when they would go back to the root of it, which often was in another life, and clear it and get the understanding of it, the reason for it, the learning from it, the symptom in today in their physical body or life would disappear. She developed the technique, and then it got to the point where she had a 7-year waiting list and was like, oh, I better train other people to do this. And in the meantime, she was also a writer and a historian and a librarian. And so she was researching the sessions she was doing with people to validate them. And so all of her books came out. I think she's got 28 in print now, which is amazing.
Mm.
So um, that that was the history of QHHT. We came upon it in around that same time, 2013, 14, via her books. And those books are, oh my gosh, just powerful. I mean,
Yeah.
we spent several years just going through all of them and sitting with them and having downloads from them and activations, inside of ourselves from that, and wanted
Yes.
to train in that. And so that's how we came to this. And first it was the research with Atlantis, and then it was our own personal selves, and then it was like, we want to offer this to other people. And
Well, and I would describe quantum healing also as consciousness exploration.
yeah.
It's evolved so much even just since we've started it, in terms of people can now access other lives, their spirit guides, the whole what we call the quantum realms, which you could say is the metaphysical realms. People can access that eyes wide open today, no induction needed. It's just so the veils are thinning and clearing so much with everything that's happening in the world spiritually today. So I would say consciousness exploration is probably the best practical term to use for quantum healing.
And then I suppose the key is also being willing to believe what you find, because sometimes there's like, it can't be, because, Don, I'm interested, you said you're very left-brained, and I'm interested, how did you, being such a left-brain, logical, rational person, how did you get from that place to being more open and more willing to explore things that perhaps don't have the scientific evidence?
Well, Diana has always been my teacher. We've always been very, very close, and so watching her and the way she does life, was a huge influence on me. But then also, I could, because of my sensibilities and intuitive abilities, a lot of people use the word psychic, which I believe every single one of us, every human that exists is psychic and has psychic abilities. there was no other causes that I could use to account for what was happening psychically or intuitively or spiritually. So it was a choice of, do I continue to ignore what's rapidly becoming unignorable? Or do I start to explore and figure that out? Use my
Mhm.
left brainness to start to figure some of these things out and explore them.
Yeah. What kind of things do you mind sharing? Sort of give us an example of the things that were unexplainable based on, just your previous knowledge. Yeah.
Yeah. Really being able to sense energy and know what it was. For instance, in law enforcement, I could feel when somebody was lying. Uh,
Mm.
I could feel the goodness in people's hearts, even when they were acting poorly, when they were acting out in different ways. With children, my specific job and what ultimately broke my heart was forensic interviewing, which is the gathering of evidence from children and at risk adults to be used in court about the bad things that have happened to them.
Mm.
And so, being able to fill even some of the kids that were older and trying to gather their stories and get the truth of what happened when they were too scared to tell the truth, whatever was happening in them, and when they didn't want to actually tell me, I would be able to sense a lot of what had actually happened and gone on for them. So it was things like that. It was really at an energetic level, feeling it, being very aware of it, being very cognizant of it, and increasingly coming to know what that energy was.
Mm. Thank you. Diana, you've mentioned, and I think you've talked about this in the book as well, that you had a difficult experience when you were younger, and that has in many ways shaped the way you do life, as Donna says. Can you tell us a little bit about that? I mean, what were those experiences, and how did they shape them? Shape you rather?
Yeah. It's interesting how we can come from the same experience with very different ways of handling it. And I see that with us two in particular of, Donna's really good at the logical and the linear and the left brain, and that was, I would say, like, maybe a coping mechanism from our childhood, because we had a very abusive father. We were in this, Christian cult, and so we experienced abuse on all levels of our beings, physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual, from the time we were born. And so what it did what it did for me was it really developed those higher chakras, those higher sense awarenesses, because I would disassociate a lot to survive what was happening here, because it was too much for the little me. And so that's where, my psychic abilities, and I would say probably both of us, really came from, because we would escape up and out. So we became very familiar with this. And so, of course, where all of that was held was in the body and in the lower chakras. So that's where the personal healing journey came in. Um, but having such abusive experiences and energy on every levels from the time, I was born, took me into this dissociative state where it's in some ways the same as going into the subconscious mind, and so and accessing these other levels of awareness and consciousness. So in that way it came to serve. Where it didn't serve is I wasn't able to function very well at a human level a lot of the time. For example, my emotions, I wouldn't have appropriate emotional responses to things because I had learned to shut those down. And so there was, this division within myself. And in a lot of ways, it's debilitating. There's a lot of childhood and, school I don't remember because I was dissociated for so much. And so when I got into my early 20s, I started to realize that, because I was making really poor choices. I was party girl and was still disassociated a lot of the time, but I was starting to have that awareness of self in a different way. And so that was really like, I need to investigate this. And not only that, but I'm starting to see these choices I'm making are not healthy for me. And they're
Mm.
not connecting me to myself. And I don't even, where is myself? What is this self? So it's really those that took me into the healing world for my own personal needs,
Mm.
to start to feel me and be connected to me. And um, it was interesting because I had moved to Alaska, so I was very far away. Donna and I weren't connected much at all during that, except for when I would come home and always stay with her. And we were still connected, but she was off in her own journey. And so, in a lot of ways, when we started to join forces, her logical linear side, left brain, helped me to start to organize myself. And I think my, emotional intuitive side started to give her some ideas of, oh, well, this is something else I could try. So it was really quite powerful. And as I started to come into alignment with myself, which is to me is whole brain, being able to use that left brain, logical, linear, rational side, along with the right intuitive feeling brain, that it started to come together, and I really started to create my path to where I am today.
That
Yeah.
makes so much sense. And how did you deal with it, Donna? Because you said you look up. So you're oh, are you the older of the two, Diana?
Yeah,
Yeah.
she.
Oh, you are. Okay, okay. So how did you deal with it? Your way of dealing with it, apart from the dissociation, was it quite different to the way Diana dealt with it?
Well, in my 20s, I became a mom pretty young. I was 22. And so it was so much busyness, between mothering and working and religion. I did a lot of volunteer work through my church. I was attending a community Christian church at that time. And I kept really, really busy. So I would say initially it was busyness. And then once I started to want to heal, once I started having um, I wanted to be a better mom, I guess would maybe be the original way thing that got me onto that path of healing was I didn't want to recreate any of the things from my childhood. And then I did a lot of therapies of a lot of different kinds. So everything from, a little bit of traditional talk therapy, but more EMDR, STR. Diana's done breath work. I've done a lighter form of breath work. A lot of cranial sacral therapy because there was things stuck in my body that I couldn't even remember or process, mentally. And so just a lot of different therapies. And we like to say to people, the more levels or areas that you carry wounds in, the more you're probably going to need to explore different forms of therapies. It's not going to be just one because
Yes.
you have to address all these different levels of our beings, right?
So
Mhm.
you also kind of went down this path partly because you wanted to heal yourself, but you also wanted to be a better mother
Very
and
much
help.
so.
Yeah, yeah, that's beautiful.
Well, because I've always had that, we both have realized that if we want to heal any part of our lives, we have to heal ourselves in those ways. It's never the partner's issue or the boss's issue. If we're having an issue, it's our issue, and there's something in us that needs healing and addressed.
And that's such a huge thing, isn't it? Because a number of times people who've gone through a difficult childhood or difficult experiences are so living in the sort of the victimhood of, this happened to me and it's so and so's fault and I'm going to hold a grudge forever. It's like, ah. So it's a very broad general question, but I'm curious to know what kind of people actually come to you for your kind of healing.
Mm.
I'd say they're all over the place.
Mhm.
I'd say there's a lot of people that are still stuck in the mindset that the world is happening to me, and I'm a victim of everything that happens. And then we have very, very awakened
Mhm.
beings who come to us and understand they are participating in creating everything that happens in their outer reality and everything
Mhm.
in between. So
Yeah,
I'd say we get clients all over the board.
yeah. And
And
that's
that's
such a fundamental shift in perspective, I think, is that shift from, life is happening to me to life is happening for me.
mm,
So I know that's been a huge part of our own personal shift into, empowerment and freedom is
yes.
to realize that um, in a way we get to offer that, I think, through our own experience to those that we serve. And I know for myself, in the therapies I still do, because I won't do anything for other people I don't do for myself. First is even with that knowing that I am the creator of my own reality and everything in it, I still need the help of somebody else often to help me access those things within myself. So it's really interesting how that works. And, like Donna said, we have clients all across the board that come to us to me, that's profound of no matter where our self-awareness or our awareness level is, like the power of the support of other is still there and present and needed. And
Yes.
I love that, how we're all still connected in that, no matter where we are in our awareness levels.
We we're big proponents, and we talk often to all of our peers, our other practitioner friends, about this. Is that it's so important that we continue to do our own work. Diana
Mm,
and I, every single day, are working on ourselves, are still addressing what needs healing in us, and we believe that we can only assist others to the extent that we're still doing our own work.
yeah.
So.
And that's such an important point because I want to talk about the actual sessions that you do, and there's different kinds of sessions. And of course, the one that I've experienced is the surrogate quantum healing. So maybe you could explain a little bit to people who've never heard of it what that is, and it seems to me that you're unique in offering that service, or is there anybody else who does that at the moment?
There are a few. So is it okay if I
Mhm,
start? Okay.
please.
So the progression from Dolores Cannon's method of QHHT for us then went on to what's called BQH, Beyond Quantum Healing, and our very dear friend Candace Craw Goldman, who assisted Dolores Cannon in teaching the classes when Dolores was alive, Candace has developed this method called BQH, and it's part of a worldwide directory, quantumhealers.com. So there's practitioners of all kinds of energy modalities that are part of this directory and a support forum. And so that progressed to BQH. And then we both were practicing both QHHT and BQH one on one. The traditional method of those is, like if you were our client, um, we would maybe Zoom since we live so far away from each other. And we would have a session, between one of us as a facilitator and you as a client. And you would have the experience of relaxing and going into what we call the quantum realms. And we would do some consciousness exploration around whatever issues or curiosities you wanted to explore in the session. Well, there's about 10% of the population who, for some reason, could not experience a quantum healing session themselves. Maybe they're a child, maybe they are mentally disabled. We've had people that are in a coma. And then there is a few people, they have conditions like maybe aphasia, where they can't visualize. There's some people who, because of their own belief systems or, some sort of blocks that they hold, just can't seem to experience the things they want to experience and get the information they want out of a session. And so we really, in 2018, started looking at stories from practitioners that are part of this worldwide directory, that everybody would get a client or two or three or five along the way that they just couldn't do a session for whatever reason. And so it was like, well, could we serve them? And then there was one morning where I woke up and just got this huge download from I believe, both of our spirit guide teams on how to help them to start offering these surrogate sessions. And so it just went from there. We put a request out on our worldwide directory for other practitioners to be our practice clients. And within 3 hours, we had over 40 people sign up. And so we had to shut it down real quick. And
We're
so
like, oh, there's a need here.
so we jumped in and we started
Mhm.
using this protocol that our guides gave us. I mean, they gave us the whole package along with the idea of doing this. They were like, here's how you do it. There's certain preparations that we do before we even start the session, clearing in ourselves. So, yeah, the difference between a regular and a surrogate session is for these clients who can't experience a session for themselves, one of us will lay down and go into the quantum realms and explore, maybe another life. Maybe we just have conversations with their higher self or their whole soul or their spirit guides the whole time. We ask for healing for the client. We ask for questions from the client, and then those questions we ask to their higher self or their soul or their spirit guides
Mhm.
and get the answers. So
Mhm.
it's beautiful. And we just can't believe we get to do this. It is so special to see how every human is a beautiful soul, just a glorious, incredible soul. And we get to experience that. We don't even like getting to kind of meet you and talk to you is special because most clients, we just communicate over email. We don't ever actually meet the human. So we only experience them as a soul. And so
Yeah.
we're just like, wow, every client we have is incredible.
Yes, and I feel that because, I've been blessed to have had it for myself, but I've also had it for two people who I love dearly. And, I think it's amazing how you are able to do that. And I'm curious to know, what preparation do you need to do to go into that? Because so very simplistically, as a metaphor, it's like, you're a straw that's actually pulling from that person. And it, not to diminish at all what you do, but I kind of use that analogy because I do the emotion code. Dr. Bradley Nelson has created this emotion code process. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's a lot simpler than what you do. But even that was so amazing because you essentially, she's got this table of 60 emotions that are generally negative emotions that get trapped inside a person's body. And then if there's a challenge, you can use kinesthetics, muscle testing. But I do it remotely, and I use this beautiful pendant that I use that actually just gives yes or no answers. So it's connected to me, but it kind of, it's more reliable than the ring in, ring out methods that I don't really know how to do. But I've always been curious because people ask me, but how are you doing that? How are you connecting to my, so all these left-brained, MBA types who I know because I did an MBA. And they're like, but how? And I'm trying to explain it. I'm like, I'm sorry, I can't explain it. But it's, we're all energy, and somehow it's like frequencies, like on the radio. I'm trying, but I can see that they're not getting it. But it clearly works because, it takes me straight to the person's childhood. Like, they were four, something happened to you that created this emotion. Do you recognize the emotion? And they'll say, oh yeah, I remember. And what's beautiful about it, it doesn't have to be therapy. So I'm not going into it trying to make them remember all this stuff. As long as they remember it, that's all that matters, because the purpose is for them to connect the dots in their minds. Oh yes, that happened to me when I was four, and never realized that this emotion of abandonment was trapped inside me. And sorry, I'm talking too much. Generally, the podcast is you should be talking, but I just want to connect this with what you do because I found it at the beginning of last year, and I read all his books, and I watched all his YouTube videos like I do. I'm thinking, this is so good. I think I should learn this because it's the missing piece in what I do as a coach. Because when I coach people, people come in and they want to make these changes, but something in them is just not letting them. It's like, they're walking with lead in their shoes, and oh, I really want to get there, but I just can't. I don't know why. And then this was like, this would be magical because I would be able to find out what it is, release it, and they would be lighter and freer. And that's how it's worked. It's been amazing. But there was one part of that emotion thing that I didn't completely understand, because there were these different categories, including, inherited emotions, prenatal, preconception. Preconception, I'm like, what is that? So it's the emotion your soul had that you, and I found that was so powerful, but I didn't understand it until I came across Dolores Cannon. Like, oh my God, now I get it. So, so it's interesting what you said earlier, Diana, like you do one thing and then it creates questions in your mind, and then you find the answer, and then you do something else. And so it's a journey, isn't it? And I don't know why I started down this path. I'm sure there was a question behind
How
it.
there is.
But I think what I was, yes, I was saying that I could never really explain how it was that I was able to, sitting here on Zoom, so far away, connect to their subconscious mind. And then when I read Dolores' stuff and I heard her, I'm like, now I get it. So it's always there, but you just need to be able to listen and hear what they say. But what you do and what other practitioners like you do is you go so much deeper, and you become not only the conduit but also the voice of what this team is trying to tell you. And my question to you is, how do you go in so you're as clean as possible, like a straw, you don't have any debris from your own stuff or other people's stuff? And equally, when you emerge from it, how do you cleanse yourself so you're not in some way carrying other people's stuff? Does that make sense?
Mhm. I think you were led to share that because that's a perfect segue to our process, because everything is frequency. And with the emotion codes, which is wonderful, I am familiar with that. And you had a past partner that practiced that. He was a chiropractor. And so it's very powerful stuff. And my understanding of how that works is because it's a measurable frequency. And the Heart Math Institute has done a lot of research on this, of measuring the frequency of all kinds of things, but especially emotions. Also, power versus force. David Hawkins with his map of consciousness, and the scientists that created the whole scientific field of kinesiology, same thing. And so, as we know that negative emotions have a heavier, denser, lower frequency. Positive emotions have a lighter, brighter, higher frequency, and those are held in our body. And there is a Dr. Zach Bush that we follow who's done amazing research on this as well as water. And he talks about how that actually memory, what we call memory, is actually the emotions that are held in our bodies, and it becomes like a gelatinous substance that binds to our DNA. There's only one place in the hippocampus that holds any sort of scientifically discoverable memory, and it's only for 7 seconds. So, where actually the long term memory is held is in the fluids of our bodies, wrapped around our DNA in a hardened substance, which is denser and heavier and lower vibrating than when it reliquefies, than the actual fluids of our bodies. So, what we call healing and release is when we access those emotions and reliquefy them so they can flow out of our bodies. That happens in a lot of ways. You just described beautifully how you do that with using the emotion codes. We do that in our own way through the sessions we do. Body work does it, breath work does it. There's all these different modalities that access the emotions, reliquefy them, allow us to feel them, express them, and let them roll on out the way they're supposed to, which then frees up our field, which brings us into balance, and that's what we call healing. So for our own personal preparation, that's why, as Donna said earlier, we do our own work. And so we align ourselves. We both wake up and meditate that morning. We might do breath work or movement or yoga, or sometimes I just need a good cry. And so that's the first part of it. And if either one of us comes together and we are not in a place where we can clear our fields, we don't do the session that day. That's why we give a window of time to clients, because of our own personal commitment to being as clear as possible. And it's just an agreement we have, is if one of us isn't there, that's okay. We'll revisit it tomorrow. So that's the first part of what we do.
Well, and after years of practice, we've kind of we're starting to become masters of raising our frequency.
Mm-hmm.
We just have a huge array of tools to use for that. So we're both very good at not only clearing but raising our frequency. And then when we come together, we use essential oils. We do a series of tapping on different points to make sure that our physical bodies are cleared. We use a modified form of EFT, so tapping.
Emotional freedom technique.
Yep, to clear our fields
Mm-hmm.
for
Mm-hmm.
with each other. We do water alchemy. Um, yeah,
Mm-hmm. And we sit and connect. We'll
yeah,
get together and have tea and just connect our fields first as part
Yes.
before we go into a session.
yeah.
So the cleansing and the kind of, self-care is really important, isn't it, as a healer? Because I'm often dismayed by people who literally go from one client to another. Like, it's like a factory production. And I'm like, how are you doing that? Are you not going to burn out? You probably are. You get compassion fatigue, don't you? Some people are talking about compassion fatigue. But I think very often people don't realize that healing needs permission. And I love that in your process, you're very clear. But I do feel that a lot of healers go in thinking, well, surely that person's going to be grateful that I'm healing them without asking for permission. Have you ever experienced that? And not, you personally doing that, but people who do that and what that does to them and to the healing process?
Yeah. Um, in the metaphysical community, um, we run across people quite often who don't have good boundaries, who just think it's okay to psychically invade or examine people. And We actually talk about that quite often. We are honored to get to help teach classes to fellow practitioners with advanced techniques, and so we always talk about that with them. Is boundaries are so important energetically and psychically, um,
And
and
permissions.
and permissions, and not just for ourselves trying to protect what's coming into us, but also for looking at other people and examining other people at the energetic level or the psychic level. I have personally experienced when people read me without asking if that's okay, they're wrong. They'll be picking up a lot of their own energy or maybe other people's or something, but when they haven't asked my permission, they're not actually seeing or feeling me clearly. um,
Yes.
Well,
I
and we've
guess.
had another example of that is in sessions. Someone will come in, and we actually have a lot of clients that are other practitioners, which is kind of interesting. But some clients will come in and they'll want to know questions about their husband or their child, and well, what about this and that? And at first we're like, no, we need the permission of that person, and then we realized that if we ask for the higher self of that person in the session, they're very clear about like, no, that information is not appropriate, or they're very direct about that. We get no's, because there is no permission there. So
Yes.
it's been a learning for us of realizing what Donna said is if someone is trying to do that without permission, they're not actually accessing you anyway. So,
Yes.
but that's very important to us because of boundaries and just being respectful of each other's fields, because we are all energetically in each other's fields all the time. So, that's
And
a
this is why it's interesting when some people say I'm an empath and I feel everyone's energies and it's so hard. And I just at that point I think, well, maybe you've got to just learn to not just let everyone's energy bombard you. I don't know. Is it as easy as that?
Well, being an empath, I believe, is also a survival mechanism. It's usually
Mhm,
born of, some level of trauma at some
mhm,
point in your life, and
mm,
you start to kind of open up these abilities to try and stay safe, or
mhm.
whatever.
In psychological terms, it's called, hypervigilance,
Mhm.
emotional hypervigilance. And as
mhm.
children, we often learn that because our parents have big, scary emotions and expressions. And so it's like being able to read them is some sort of protection, and survival.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
So yeah, people who are like, I'm so empathic, I'm like, yeah, that's something that you can heal.
Yeah.
And it doesn't
Mhm,
mean that you are not going to have that ability, because obviously there is a very positive use for that as well.
mhm,
But yes, I think you're absolutely correct
mhm,
in, you don't have to be a victim of it. And if
mm-mm,
you feel like
no.
you are a victim of it,
Mhm.
there's some healing that needs to happen.
Well, and there's techniques, to establish your boundaries. And we actually teach these quite a lot of, like you said, you can block it out essentially by turning your attention away from it
Yes.
and saying, I'm not going to pay attention to that. I'm not going to keep, like, I use an egg of light a lot of times with a mirror like substance around the outside of it that I program to reflect their emotions back to them, but transmute it into a higher frequency. So,
Wow.
setting our field is so important. And we
Yeah.
run across this all the time because I believe we're all empaths. We all have that ability. And, there's this thing, like you said, of like, oh, I'm an empath. It's so hard. I can't go in public, all these things. I understand that because I've experienced that. And I've also learned that there is ways to manage that. We both have. And that's a game changer right there.
Yeah, one of the tools, I think what comes most often to me to do if I start to feel other people's stuff, or I mean, today, let's be honest, the world today, there's a lot of collective stuff that's just huge, right?
Yeah.
Because everybody's things personally that needs healing is up right now. Like every human is
Mhm.
being a little bit forced to look at what they're carrying in their fields of being that is dense and is heavy and needs healing. And so that's all up for everybody. So that means the collective feelings, the collective energy is just pretty intense right now. So one of the tools, when I start to feel the collective or somebody else's stuff come in, is just there's room in my field for that to be coming in, so I need to refill with myself. I need to resource. I need my energy to get bigger and to fill out my field so that there's not space for something else coming in, if that
Yeah.
makes sense. So it's just tapping, tuning back into the core of who I am, my soul light, you could say, and just, blowing that out into my field so that I'm full of my higher frequencies.
And I think that's a nice segue into some of your recent books, and the one I'm reading in particular is 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 a kind of a very compassionate look at some of the dogmas that people live with, whether it's around fear around death, or whether it's, more sensitive topics such as abortions or suicide. And I'd like you to talk a little bit about that. And it's I think what's fascinating about that is that that is not you giving your opinions. That's coming mostly from sessions you've had with clients whose, super consciousness or whose higher self or their team have come in, and this message is consistent.
Well, the reason we wrote that book and started the whole New Earth Healing series came out of sessions with clients. And the first one is the topic is self-healing.
Mm.
And it's all healing is self-healing is what we believe. And so all of these sessions is because people want healing in different areas of our life. So it's what is healing and what is happening in the sessions that they are healing themselves. Very profound. And then the Doorways of Death book, that's one of the main fears that people have is around death of some sort. Theirs, somebody else's, something's already happened. So from what we believe is what we create. So we believe this and we create this. And death in particular is a belief. It's a belief system. And Dolores Cannon's work and many others has shown that death isn't what we think it is. And yet it is a huge fear generator. It's a huge block, huge challenge in so many ways, and it's also a doorway. So it's the doorway of birth and the doorway of death in these great cycles of life. So that's what kind of led us into it. And then as we did research from it and in the sessions themselves, all these different people's, super conscious and higher selves would give, like you said, consistent answers. Death isn't actually real in the way that you think it is. It's something else. And so it was starting to explore that. All right, well then, what is it? And how does that inform our lives? Because it really does, just like birth does. Like we have to go through those in order to have this human experience. So,
And every story has to end.
mhm.
Every story needs an ending. And, being able to see from the soul perspective what these human lives really are is so freeing and so beautiful because, it's described as like a dream or as a stage or as a video game. But it's really a story our soul is both writing, directing, and acting in as us, the human. It's a story. And every story has to have a beginning and an ending, but that ending is a segue home. It's a segue into another story. It's a segue back to the greater person that we are, the greater story that we're in as a soul, beyond just this human story.
Mhm.
So, death is such a beautiful doorway to what our human minds can't quite contain, what our human minds can't quite comprehend. It's that big and it's that fantastic and it's that good. It's that loving. It's that peaceful and joyful place we return to, soul wholeness that we
Mhm.
return to when we die, that it's hard for our human brains to even comprehend what that's like, what we return to.
Well, and it taps right into the God concept source. It taps into all the beliefs, the ineffable, the things we don't understand. But every human on the planet, I would say, has that knowing and beliefs around the God concept or source or all that is or creator. Even the people that are atheist, that's it's still defined by that. So death takes us right into that.
And I think one of the beauties of that is that you then start to live differently, don't you? Because if you no longer fear death, maybe you make
Mhm.
different choices. I
Mhm.
also love the fact, the consistent message that comes out that whatever you do, there's no right or wrong. There's just choices. And actually
Well,
maybe it influences your the how long you live or the quality of your life, but everything's an experience and a lesson. And that's just, again, it's sort of, it's paradigm shifting, isn't it? When you look at life in that way.
yes, that's why we did chapters on all of the most difficult deaths for people,
Mm.
like murder and suicide and abortion and war, is because those are the real sticking points. Like we might all accept, yeah, we're going to die. And, but the acceptable death is in old age in our sleep. And yet, how often does that actually happen? How much more does people die from cancer or a car accident? That's one of the biggest ways people die. So, yeah, there's so much freedom in that. There was for us, and that's where our really heart is of why we write these books and share, is we have changed the way we live. It has informed our lives so much, and those of our clients that we serve, that we're like, man, we want to share this with more people because we've experienced personally so much freedom. And like you said, it points right back to, well, how do I choose to live?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep. I would say personally, how I do life differently is understanding the soul perspective on a human lifetime. They don't take it seriously like we do, but they love it. Like, it's like we die out of a human life, and at the soul level, we can't wait to come back, which
It's
is
like
hard.
binge watching a Netflix,
Yeah, it is.
what's gonna happen
Yeah,
next?
so it's so different than our human perspective on this lifetime. But when you start to really understand the soul perspective on why that is, for me, it makes me live fuller and appreciate all the things, whether I think they're positive or negative. Like we can only really experience, for instance, missing somebody here because at the soul level, we're always with all of our people. We don't ever get to miss them or to fear their death or, all the things that we get to experience that we call kind of bad or negative as a human. We actually come for that because we only get to do these things here.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
it's like that raises the question of what is it to be human, and our exploration of death and healing taps us right back into that emotional spectrum and how core that is to this human experience. And like Donna said, even fear, even shame, even guilt, like all these things were like, oh, negative, bad, don't want to feel that. Well, it's still part of all of this. And so, from the soul perspective, it's like we get to have those experiences, and it's the
Mhm.
vast range that's available. Like you said, with the emotion code, how many different, 60
He's
different,
got, yes,
so
yes,
many. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah, and we have to be human to
Yeah.
experience those, all of those at the level we get to experience them here.
Hmm.
Like literally barely, I don't even know if there are other species in the galaxy or the universe that has the emotional spectrum. We should ask that
We
question
should.
sometime. The souls have kind of said, or the guides have said at different times, that our emotional spectrum is way bigger and way more
Mhm.
intense than anybody else's in the universe.
Which is only possible because of the polarity system we're in
Yeah.
duality. We have strong positives and negative energies that make it possible. It's like through our limitations that we set for ourselves to make the human life, do we get to actually experience all of this?
I want to ask you a sort of question that's coming from me personally. So when I think about death, I don't think I particularly fear death for myself, but I do fear what my death would do to the people who depend on me, or, because obviously they're still going to feel the human feelings of losing someone that they relied on, who they really loved. And what would our sort of higher self say to that? How can we make it easier for the people in our lives? So when we do actually go, when we do die, and we do it sort of peacefully, because we're like, I'm looking forward to going there where it's going to be less dramatic and there's going to be light and love. But then knowing that, but hey, I'm going to leave behind these people who are going to be a bit devastated. What would you say to that?
Well, I would say from the soul perspective, we plan our deaths and who it's going to impact like we plan any other part of our life. You know, we plan it with the people that it's going to impact the most. They use it as catalysts in their own lives
Mm.
to learn, to expand, to develop in new ways. Um, so just communicating that to people. I think talking about these things, like, and being very open and exploring these concepts will relieve a lot. Because, yeah, we grieve, we miss each other intensely. This is all very real for us. And yet, understanding the soul perspective on that is we plan it this way and getting curious about why. Why did we plan for this to happen in this way? Why do the people left behind who are missing or grieving that person, why did they plan it that way? And I think just talking about it with the people important to us. And for me, yeah, the thought of who you leave behind is also for me the hardest part of thinking about my own death. And yet understanding that soul perspective that, well, we were all part of planning how and when that's going to happen and the impact it's going to have, just relieves that somehow.
Well, and it all serves. I have a brief story around that. I had an old boss of a healing center I was in that her mother had dementia. And for a good solid 5+ years before she passed on, didn't know anybody, called her by her father's name, and just needed 100% care. And it was challenging. It was very, very challenging. And after her mother passed, the woman, my boss, is very psychic, and so she can speak to spirits and see them and all of that. And so her mother came to her after she passed and was out of the body, and they were talking about it. And my friend was like, "What was the? Why did you linger so long in the state of not knowing, where you're really not here, but your body's still living?" And the mother's spirit said, "Because you needed to learn that not everything is all about you."
Oh. Mhm.
She had to care for someone else, and she did tend to struggle with being very egocentric and all focused on herself. And so it was like, wow, the lessons are continuing even with that. And the other thing I would say about that is, again, taps us into that grief field, which I think we're just beginning to investigate what that is, that morphic field of grief. Like, I can say this whole year, my personal clients I've been having go into these spaces of deep, deep, expansive grief, because it is one of the places that holds everything, holds the joy, holds the love, holds the connection, holds the missing and the tears, which is where the truth is, taps us back into ourself. And we don't grieve something unless we love them.
Mhm.
And we have those experiences with it. And so I'm having this whole learning, and for myself personally, of what is this morphic field of grief that is so collective. And all of our stuff is up right now, like Donna said. And how we transmute that, how we learn from it, how we process it, is stepping into what I call the morphic field of grief. Well, one of the fastest ways to step into it is through death. I mean, look at like the death of a pet, where there isn't all the complications of the human relationship, and it's just pure like grief, tears. So to me, I think about that when I go into that part of it, of like, how is this going to affect the people that are still there when I move on out of my body? There's so much value there.
That's so beautiful. Thank you so much. And as we sort of wind to a close, I just wanted to tell you that there was one particular bit in your book that really sort of solidified some of the things that your session that you did for me did. And it was where you said that Jesus said that I just remind myself that every soul loves me, however much the human is behaving in a way that tells me that they don't. And that kind of was that's how he dealt with all the difficulties in his life. And I just thought that's such an amazing little reminder for us, like when someone's being really, really horrible, to just step back and say, well, actually, inside him is this soul that really loves me and loves every other soul. And so let's maybe just take a different perspective. Um, I thought that was beautiful, and I want to thank you for that.
Mm.
Are there any sort of final thoughts you want to leave us with? Where do you see your journey, say 5 years out? Do you have other strands that you're really exploring that you want to build on?
Yeah, definitely. All those ideas, right? We're working on another book right now around spirituality, sexuality, and the
Hmm.
whole healing of our sexual energy. We've got several more books planned in our series of nonfiction, and then we're also just beginning to write our next fiction series of the ancestor series of what was happening here on the North American continent during that same time frame before Atlantis fell about 12,500 years ago. So from the literary stance, we have a lot in the works.
Yes. And then we really want to, and we're starting to develop magic classes. So as
She's
world
like,
as
Tell me more.
please come.
as worldwide people are
Mm,
coming into their metaphysical abilities, that is the human birthright,
mm,
we want to create just a very simple venue, just an online, we'll call it a class, but really it'll be a way for people to begin to practice their abilities, across the board and
Mhm.
develop accuracy and develop them. So, for instance, we did one pilot and we practiced a little bit of telepathy and a little bit of clairvoyance, which is clear seeing, um, and clear knowing, um, clear cognizance.
Mhm.
But,
Mhm.
just simple, basic ways for us all to develop these abilities that are coming online because we're going to need them more and more going forward.
mm.
Humanity used to be able to sense energy at every level all the time and be what we would consider superhumans. And that's where we're headed again.
Mhm. Well, and
So,
people are experiencing this all the time, and sometimes they think they're going crazy, you
Yeah.
know, seeing stuff out of the corner of their eyes, or we all have telepathic moments all the time, right? You think of somebody and then they call you, or just in our dreams we're meeting. And so we've experienced more and more of that of ourselves, but other people saying, oh my gosh, this crazy thing happened to me. So we're all seeking understanding of what these things are that are happening in our consciousness, and that's where this idea came from. And really, that's what we call magic, you know,
yeah.
is something that's beyond the ordinary.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're super excited about that. And we'll put that out on all of our platforms and just invite people in to practice with us. And we really did it not to teach people, but so we had people to practice with.
And it's a great way to just open people's minds a little bit and get them curious and so they can go down
Yes.
whichever rabbit hole they
Yeah.
choose to. I think that's beautiful. So how do people reach you? Is it your sort of, the website links that you've sent me before, or do you have another platform where some of these other courses and events that you host will be posted?
So our website is Adair, Ddadair, and the reason for that is that's our maiden name. That's Diana's last name, Donna and Diana. That's our author name, Adair. So ddadair.com is our website. There is the best way to contact us is through the Quantum Healers directory. So quantumhealers.com, and you can put in our names. There's also links to that directory from our website.
Mhm.
But there's a lot of information and ways to contact us more through the Quantum Healers directory than through our
Mm.
website.
And
Yeah,
that's where we'll be posting our upcoming classes
yeah.
and that.
Amazing. It's been such a pleasure to talk to both of you. Is there any sort of parting wisdom you'd like to share to people who are listening, especially if they're new to this and they're thinking, well, my head feels a little bit sort of, like it's just exploded with all of what I've just heard. What would be a good place for them to start to just gently expand their knowledge?
I would say, well, first of all, I want to thank you for creating a platform like this because I absolutely love and resonate with the idea of we all have interesting lives. We're ordinary people and we all feel so ordinary, almost to a fault sometimes, that we overlook the very things in ourselves that are our seeds to our own growth and
Mm,
learning expansion. So I know for me, what has worked the best is to pay attention to what I'm drawn to. And whether it's from the mind or the heart, which connecting them is a very powerful way to go towards what we're drawn to, because we all have a million things coming at us all the time. So being able to tap in and say, wow, I'm really drawn to this one thing I heard. I'm going to investigate that. Would be what my recommendation would be is follow that pull and really start to pay attention to that pull instead of the shoulds.
Yes. Beautiful. Thank you.